don't want to be in the way. All right, so we are going to dive right into our final panel of this conference. I want to warmly welcome the moderator and panelists of a panel focused on programs. So we want to think about what programs are out there, just a snapshot of a few that are elevating and supporting youth voice and agency. And so without further ado, I am going to invite Jessica Forrester, who is a postdoc in Youth-Nex, to come up here and begin our session. Thank you so much.
All right, I will go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I am honored and excited to go ahead and moderate our final closing panel for today, and it will center youth programs, our programs that center youth and elevate and amplify youth voice. So I am Jessica Forrester. I am a current Mellon postdoctoral researcher here working with Youth-Nex, as well as an alum of the University of Virginia from the School of Engineering. And again, I'm excited to be here, and I will go ahead and let the rest of the panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amaris Ramey. My pronouns are they, them. By day, I am the grassroots organizing manager at Mentor National. By night, I am a freelance writer. My essays on the intersection of gender, sexuality, young adulthood, and advocacy have been published by Teen Vogue, Refinery 29, The Huffington Post, the Hechinger Report, Parents, and more. I am also an advocacy content creator. My TikTok channel has over 1.7 billion views on advocacy for young people. Thank you. And I'm a grad student, so don't ask me how many hours of sleep I get at night. But I'm gonna primarily be talking about the youth-led advocacy guide that I am the project manager for at Mentor National. It is a city-funded effort to create a functional guide that provides best tips and practices for programs who want to implement authentic youth-led activities and events.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lizette Solano, but I go by Liz for short, and I'm a 10th grader at Chicago Bulls College Prep, and I'm here with MICVA Challenge.
Hi, everyone. My name is James Fields. I am the Senior Program Director of the Neighborhood Leadership Initiative at MICVA Challenge and also a MICVA alum.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abby Akihe. I'm a second-year graduate student at the Baden School of Public Policy and Leadership. I'm also involved with Voices for Virginia's Children as an intern this summer. And locally, I'm on the advocacy committee for Sin Barreras, which is a group that does work with immigrants in the area.
Hi, everyone. You all look really fabulous from up here, first of all. My name is Kristen Lennox. I use the pronouns she, her, and we. And I'm the advocacy and engagement manager over at Voices for Virginia's Children, as well as an adjunct instructor with VCU's School of Social Work.
It's important for you to speak up, because if you don't speak up, no one could really hear you and hear the problems in your neighborhood, and they don't see any of the problems.
I'm making a difference in the community by speaking up and telling my thoughts. To let the youngsters know that, don't be scared to stand up for yourself, to speak up for yourself.
Yo creo teniendo acción en la comunidad es importante porque muchos jóvenes no pueden porque están nerviosos o creen que su voz no es importante. Yo quiero que mi comunidad esté más fuerte y más lista para que tenga lo que necesite.
Young people having the opportunity, the agency, and the power to inform decision makers on things that impact them within their community. Being able to let them generate solutions for community members and stakeholders and tackle different issues that they come up with.
I'm working with MICVA to clean up neighborhoods and make youth voice more empowered. I wish people knew that us youth are working hard to make these communities safe for the next generation.
I'm taking action in my community by having cleanups and being in a program called MICVA, where we beautify our community and make it more comfortable.
I think that the community would be different if I took action by telling people and making posters and signs that show what's going wrong in the community and maybe people will read the signs and feel that what they're doing is wrong, and they will try to stop me. Then it will be cut down. I hope that my community can become a better place where people can live and play free without having to worry.
The fact that the youth are taking matters into their own hands and they're being the change that they want to be in their community, just like picking up trash, that is an effort that I really celebrate and uplift.
My dreams or hopes in the future for my community is for women to be able to walk through without having to worry about anything. And maybe that kids can run around safely in neighborhoods without having to worry about gunshots or being killed.
My community will be different if you took action how we did at NLI by cleaning up, picking up trash, being nice to people. I feel like that is an actual problem. And just overall being respectful. My dreams and hopes is that we can heal and move forward from the traumatic things that happened to us in the past.
We always say youth are the future, right? But youth are actually the present. We need to be able to invest in them now, believe in them now, really harness their power and their knowledge now so that we can have better outcomes in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that video and for sharing just a little bit about yourselves. I'm excited about the energy that we have going on today. And as I said earlier, this panel will really focus in on programs and best practices that the individuals on this panel have used to continue to amplify youth voice. And I think that's so important when we're thinking about especially youth supporting young people. And something that really stood out to me yesterday was a question that was posed by someone in the audience, kind of asking the second panel, how can policymakers, and I'll include educators, practitioners, researchers, how can they practice what they preach? How can we not only say that we believe and we value young people's voice, this saying of I hear you, I see you, but how can we actually put this into practice? How can we turn this belief and this value into something that's actionable, which I think is really great for this closing conversation, because a lot of people have talked about their strategies, about relationship building and community building, valuing culture. And I think this is a great conversation to end with because we can kind of continue to build on this wealth of strategies and best practices within the programs represented here. But also, like Nancy mentioned earlier, start to think about how we can not only learn from each other, but adapt what we're learning into our own context, because what might work for people on the panel might not work for you specifically, but there might be ways that you can listen, learn, but also adapt to best fit your context. So I'm excited to kind of start this conversation and continue what we've already discussed so far. So to kick it off, I would love for everyone to just give us a quick insight about the program that you're here to represent, and that might include your role, but also what are some key practices that y'all have used to promote and elevate and uplift youth voice within your program? And anyone can start.
James Fields again, and just wanted to kind of like let everybody know what MICFA Challenge is. MICFA Challenge is to develop youth to be empowered and informed and active citizens who will promote a just and equitable society. And what that looks like in practice is that we have a 6-step process that kind of leads us through our programming, which is examining identity within community, identifying like issues that young people want to actually be able to tackle, conducting research and setting smartest goals are some of those things, analyzing power because they work with stakeholders and elected officials, developing strategies, which is like the best and the best part of the work. And then I think giving them also like just a platform to showcase the work and also reflect about what that looks like. So for me within the program, I have the neighborship leadership initiative, and it's community-based programming for middle school young people, 7th to 9th grade. And pretty much the practice looks like creating youth safe spaces with a trauma-informed lens. And what that looks like is grounding that group in community norms. But that looks like letting young people actually say what those norms should be and understanding that that's their space when they actually come into that space. Having a mood check People know that, like, 1 to 10, temperature check, seeing how young people are doing. Icebreaker questions is always fun. I got a foodie next to me, so it's always good to kind of talk about what's your favorite spicy food, or like what's your favorite restaurant to kind of go to in your community to get a meal. So I believe that like the foundation of youth safe spaces and letting young people ground themselves in their own norms that they come up with, having strength-based language and approaches, also leveraging their assets is something that's essential to the development and the growth of our young people. So what that looks like is Liz can come in, Jontel can come in, and it's like, ran it up. What happened to you today? What do you want to share? Was the field trip okay? Was lunch okay? And giving them that space just before we kind of start our agenda and programming. I also feel like a pillar is also mentorship. So being able to really unpack and meet young people where they're at. Nothing can happen without trust. So trust, for me, is the first step. If my parents don't trust me, my young people can't trust me, and I'm not going to be able to retain to actually be able to do the work. Actually giving young people also the space to explore their personal values and what those look like within their communities and within the worlds and the institutions that they kind of go into. And I think the biggest part of mentorship and the relationship aspect for me is the level of vulnerability. I can't compartmentalize when I go into the space. I have to be able to do my self-work, to share myself with my young people, my story, my journey, and also be able to carve out space for them to be able to really talk about theirs. So I feel culturally responsiveness is essential when thinking about mentorship. And for me, the biggest goal is transformational leadership. Because if I'm just saying, hey, Liz, here's a gift card. Hey, Liz, here's your check. That's not going to promote what we really want. I have to be able to actually say, like, let's talk about self-love. Let's talk about commonalities. Let's talk about grace. So we talk about showing ourselves grace within our program, because young people have to navigate through these institutions and communities every single day, and those conditions look completely different from when I was doing it. So those are some of the essential pieces. And then youth voice. I think that knowing that we came to a conference, young people needed to also be able to have ownership over this space, to do community builders, to do team builders, to have energizers, because that is actually giving them autonomy. So at MICFA, we really want them to be able to have the autonomy within session. And that also then promotes them to be able to feel like they have decision-making power. And when they have decision-making power, they have clear ask, they have a call to action, and then we can focus on implementation. Authentic decision-making and ownership over the space is also important. So it's really important that we have leadership roles. So when young people come in, there's a butcher paper with all of the things that you can be able to sign up for today. So I'm not leading the check-in. Liz is leading the check-in. Jontel is leading our closing power clap, where we're reflecting on how are we going to summarize our session for today. And usually we summarize it in mangoes, okay? So we rub our hands together, and then all the young people are saying 1, 2, 3, mangoes. And mangoes for them is joy when they're leaving our space. And another essential piece is community empowerment. Building relationships, again, I think is very essential. Having that strong connection to community. And we have our program downtown, we're not being rooted in community. All right, so what are we really then telling our young people? So being able to be rooted in community, being able to like have ultimate opportunities to continue to focus on community wellness, and for like what does that look like from a youth-led lens, right? Like focus on community dialogues and story exchanges. And what does that look like from a youth-led lens? I'm gonna keep saying youth-led because it's not me. It's me actually just giving and providing a space and letting them put together what they feel like they want to be the reflection of, to show to the community. And reflection. I think this is also just important. Through everything that I mentioned, reflection has to happen every single day, because you give young people the opportunity to self-reflect, to also give them feedback, but also affirm themselves. So knowing that that reflection is ultimately helping young people feel confident and empowered is essential. And the most important one, and it's the last one, is peer-to-peer connection. Peer-to-peer connection has to be the cornerstone of my focus, because I'm one person facilitating all of these young people. But if they have that connection with their peers, we have this thing called working towards excellence. So there's woes. Every single session, you're sitting in front of your peer. You get 1 minute, I get 1 minute. What's on your mind? You're talking about applying for high school. You're talking about looking at college. We're going to continue to make this a routine in our practice because that's the way that we're going to be able to have transformational leadership.
Yeah, for sure. That's just super exciting, James, and I'm excited to add to that. I think we have similar ideologies. So at Voices for Virginia's Children, we just launched our new youth development program that I've been spearheading called Virginia's Youth in Action. And that was actually named by young people too. So I really loved the last panel talking about compensating our young folks as experts and leaders. We made it a point in our development of this program to, with the support of a consultant who's worked and been in and participated in and led youth development programs, also helped us lead focus groups where we compensated young people to let us know everything from the name to the timing. So definitely having the resources and pouring into young people as experts and trusting them. Something that guides me a lot is healing-centered engagement. Are there other healing-centered super fans in here? Yes, okay. So Dr. Sean Ginwright is a professor for African American Studies at San Francisco State University, also the CEO for Flourish Agenda. And healing-centered engagement is it's like the continuation or next step or pivot from trauma-informed care, where trauma-informed care is pretty clinical. Healing-centered engagement is explicitly political. And that being one of its tenets, as well as being culturally grounded. So we've talked a lot about that. I wanted to say the weekend. It's not the weekend. Yesterday and today we've been talking about cultural humility and being grounded in that. Another tenet of that is being driven by assets and potential. Trauma-informed care looks a lot at deficits, right? So how do we look at potential and navigate that and speak into it? And then another tenet of that is also looking at the adults that are working with young people. So to add to your discussion, James, about reflection and processing, Dr. Ginwright says, we can't expect the young people to be well if the adults are wounded. Right? Let me say it again.
Say that again. Say it one more time.
Right? Everyone got their pens? We can't expect the young people to be well if the adults are wounded. So there's mirror work that needs to happen, and it happens naturally when we work with young people. And they also follow a karma model, which actually reminds me a lot of the portrait that we talked about yesterday. And so the karma model is CARMA, culture, agency, relationships, meaning, and aspirations. So definitely look into Dr. Ginwright. I'm clearly a super fan. Look into Flourish Agenda. There's a certification program you can get through them that I've completed, which provides a lot of insights and guidance. But in addition to that, with our focus groups, we discovered some best practices as voiced and by young people and as guided by young people. So compensation, which we talked about already. But I will say again and how important that is. And maybe it isn't always fiscal, right? James is talking about these relationships being, avoiding them being just this transactional experience. How are we pouring back into young people? How are we letting them know what their statements or their advocacy has led to? How are we talking to them about white supremacy, about power mapping, about justice, about looking at about them having the audacity for justice. It's also timing, right? Are we trying to do things in times that work for them when they have full brain capacity to engage? Like this amazing conference is also during a time where a lot of young people can't be here, right? Or they have to take some time off from school. And so that's an interesting thing to kind of think about when we work with young people. I expect myself to have my phone ready at 6 or 7 at night or on the weekends when young people can engage with me. And that has tension with the 9 to 5 that we're stuck in, right? It's also offering feedback loops, again, coming back to power. There's an inherent power dynamic that happens when older people work with younger people. So making even anonymous feedback loops available so that that power can be dismantled in some way or negotiated in some way. And young people can feel like they have the autonomy to be able to speak their mind and not put their position in your program at risk, right? It's also parent support. A lot of parents of advocates and activists have never parented an advocate and activist. So they need support amongst one another, as well as from the people that are pouring into their young folks. It's language. So, I mean, language access, absolutely, but also written comprehension. Are we writing something that could be read at a 5th grade level that young people can access? All young people that have different backgrounds and different educational access. Communication. So a funny thing that we discovered is we wanted to let young folks know that they got into our program, Virginia's Youth in Action. And we wanted to talk to them about advocacy days. We'll do the big pinnacle of our program is doing state level legislation at the General Assembly. So preparing them to meet with delegates. And adults were getting excited about notifying them. And they're like, oh, Kristen, let us know, their reactions. And call them. Some people really wanted me to call them so I could hear their reactions. Folks, how many young folks answered their phone when I called them? Any guesses? Literally 0, right? And we knew this, right? People that work with young people know 0. And I told them that. I was like, I'll try. I finished those phone calls in 5 minutes because nobody answered because they want to be texted, and that's fine. And they'll text me back at 9 o'clock or 11:30, and that's fine too. So being ready and prepared for that so that you can actually meet them where they are. That's the biggest part, meeting young people where they are. And then coming in with a growth mindset. I think it's important to model that, right, for young people, because it's important to be able to demonstrate that we can get things wrong and not be experts. And the whole point is to not be experts. The whole point is you are naturally an expert in your lived experience and relying on that and trusting that. So those were some of the best practices that we've learned and some of the ideologies that really guided and the formulation and how I engage with young people, especially around healing-centered engagement and identity, and how identity is such a healing thing, which we've already talked a lot about yesterday and some this morning.
Hi, Amaris Ramey, they, them. So I mentioned that today I'm representing Mentor National as the grassroots organizing manager. We are not a direct service organization, so a majority of our work is not done directly with young people, but our mission is to really just drive equity and close the mentoring gap. But that changed this year when I started the position in January. It was my 3rd week. And I was in a meeting because I had heard that the government relations team was working on a grant that was given to us by Citibank to develop a youth-led advocacy guide. So I'm brand new, don't really know a lot of people, but I'm in a Zoom call with a couple of folks, and we spent about 30 minutes talking about the idea of this guide. And I said, I'm sorry, I have to interject and ask, where are the young people? And they were like, oh, you're right. Where are the young people? And so I think one thing that I really went into that meeting thinking about is that at the time I'm 23. So I just graduated college last year, and I do advocacy work in my space in my personal life, but even just me in this room is not going to be a representation of all of the voices that are required to engage in youth-led advocacy. So after that, we talked about hiring some young activists. So we hired 5 young activists from around the country to work with us to develop this guide. And in our weekly meetings, when we're having conversations with these folks, one thing that came up from a lot of us was power. When I asked what is stopping us from moving forward in the advocacy space, and I had to ask them that, but I also had to ask myself, what is stopping me from moving forward? What is keeping me contained? And the answer was always power. And then we started to ask, who has the power? Where does power come from? What is institutional power? What is personal power? What is youth power? How can power be redistributed to youth so that we can properly engage in these activities and properly lead these activities? And so after those conversations, that is where we started to develop the Youth-Led Advocacy Guide that is going to be released early next year, which provides mentors, teachers, funders, and programs best tips and practices on how to engage and authentic youth-led activities and events. So our advocacy guide is centered around the concept of power, and throughout the narrative, we are taking that concept of power and really just showing how we can move that around to work with coalition building, to have intersectional power, to work with power in the school systems, power outside of the school systems, power in your home. One thing that my parents told me a lot when I was younger is that I was a playground activist. So they said, oh, you're always, don't push that person off the swing. Don't talk to them like that. But how do we move from being in the playground to being in the field in the real world? And that can be very scary for a lot of us, especially those of us who fall into marginalized communities. And so working on this guide not only talks about the practical steps that programs can take, but it also talks about how to give that resources to the program so they can then give it back to the youth and put it in their hands. Because a lot of the times, young people it's not that we're lacking the knowledge, we're lacking the access. So we have to talk about how we can access that power, how we can use it, how we can have that agency to have that power. But that most definitely involves people within those positions of power. So as we continued to develop the guide, one of the things that came up was that we don't want to just talk about how youth can stand in their power. We want to actually have some examples of that. So we decided to also launch an online magazine that will be released at the end of this quarter, which focuses on young people who have pieces around identity, community, health, wellness, education, and equity. So out of the 5 young people who we were working with, they became editors of their own column. And so one person was in charge of identity and community, another person was in charge of health and wellness. And what we did was hire a writer and hire a graphic designer who was also 21, who designed the entire website and the entire guide. And through that, we had sessions every week on how we could properly mirror that guide into the online magazine. So there's 2 different things that we have. So we talk about programs and what people can do, but then we say, well, how does this actually look? What are the stories in our communities? If we're going to talk about elevating youth voice, we don't want to just talk about it, we want to be about it. Where's the action? And so creating this guide, I think, is not just about talking about steps and things in theory, but also what are the actions. So at the end of each section, for each section, we talk about power, and we talk about the specific type of power. So for example, we have a section that talks about collective power. We give a historical background on collective power. We provide references and definitions, because let me step back a little bit. That's another thing that I think we should be talking about, is that it's not that we don't understand the work. We may not have the language to access it as well. So that's why we have a definitions page, because a lot of times we're already engaging in this work. We just don't know what it's called. We can see that in so many situations. I remember talking to my parents not too long ago about my identity as a non-binary person. And, they were like, oh, we don't understand. And I was like, okay, let me give you some context. At home, when, I was growing up, my dad was a stay-at-home dad and my mom was working to get her doctorate degree. And I was like, to everyone else, y'all were weird. They were like, why is your dad staying at home changing the diapers? Why is your mom not cooking? And I explained to them that they were shifting the gender binary. And in so many ways, my parents were acting in a way that broke the gender binary, but they didn't have the language to describe that. They just said, oh, this is how we're raising our family, because my mom said, I want a doctorate, so I'm going to get a doctorate. Mm-hmm. But now looking back at this and having that language to really articulate what that looks like in practice really helps us move forward as people. And so I think it's just really important when we talk about this guide and talking about best practices for youth-led activities and events, that we not only highlight youth, but we also give them tools and resources.
That was just, I have so many notes just thinking about what everyone's saying, and that kind of leads into one of my questions, because on one side y'all spoke about what is driving your programs, about cultural relevance, about the social interactions between mentors and young people, between young people and young people. But also I feel like Amaris really talked about these constraints and these barriers. Also, Kristen, when you're talking about timing with communication, when you're talking about timing of events, when we're talking about accessibility. So I think it'll be great to hear about any barriers that your programs have faced and how, especially like James kept saying, how youth led actions to overcome those barriers.
I could tackle that one. I think that the barriers are being able to unlearn and name the harmful practices that are rooted in white supremacy culture. And knowing that it really starts with having our young people be rooted in their community, having them have the opportunity to explore the pride that comes with coming from that community. And the example for me is that I grew up in North Lawndale on the west side of Chicago. I went to Roswell B. Mason Elementary School. We have community councils in North Lawndale, Gage Park, and New City back of the yards. When I was in 8th grade, like how John Taylor came up here yesterday on the panel, this opportunity didn't exist. So for me to be able to have my young people here, to be able to have their parents here, like that's the work. Like to have him be the 8th grader from my from my school, who I had challenges there. I was disposable there, right? Like sometimes I didn't matter there. So being able to also know when you talk about the work of like self, she told me last year when she came to session, Liz said, this was a healing space. I did a 10-month leadership program with the Surge Institute where I had to look inward, where I had to take a step back to say, am I performing or am I being authentic, right? And being able to then let that be the mirror, right? So when we prepped and I'm talking to them, right? Let go of all the other expectations that you don't have to have because you're already more than enough. So I think that one of the barriers is also like identifying that our young people are not broken. The institutions and the systems that mirror back that to them are. Because I had to have a program and this experience with my young people, knowing that I had to do this self-work to be a better reflection as a leader for them, right? The modeling. I also feel that like the adult is power dynamics, right? If it's a youth-led space, it means it's a youth-friendly space. That means that I'm actually saying, hey, I'm gonna model what it is to look like to do our check-in. And then Liz is gonna be able to do it every single week, right? Chantel is gonna be able to send me an affirmation. Liz is gonna be able to send me a quote of the day. They're actually going to figure out what those things are and how they're gonna resonate with their peers. So just being able to also know that like, we can't continue to not name that racism against Black and brown and BIPOC youth is they're always met with violence, right? Like if you protest, you can't protest that way. If you say that, you can't say that way. That has to be able to like just be off the plate. So like wellness, right? Like clearing the plate and being able to focus on like what youth need. I think also another barrier is like capitalism. Like just to be truly just transparent, the disinvestment within neighborhoods that I come from and people who look like us in this space, it doesn't happen. So I feel like we need to be able to really like lean on also the private sectors to let them know that this is a part of your job also, right? And you need to be able to uplift that with employment opportunities, with actual opportunities for like our parents. I now get to go back and say, I'm gonna take my 2 parents and figure out how I ingrain them more in our program. Because then I can leverage being able to actually support the young people because their expertise is knowing who their kids are. And then the young person's expertise is, hey, like I have all the divine gifts I need to explore that. I just need the right thriving conditions. And it looks different for every single young person.
Thank you. Yeah, snaps for that. I'm really excited to add because you started talking about adult ego, and I think that's a really important thing to talk about. So, to quote John Lewis, we're asking young people to get in good trouble, necessary trouble to redeem the soul of America. And when we're doing that, we're enlightening young people, and we are giving them the audacity of justice, of equity, and all the things they deserve and all the things that they're entitled to. And it requires humility from adults and grown people around them, and being open to being held accountable for things, right? And that's mirror work as well. That's also like offering brave and safe spaces to fail and flounder as a young person. Because that's such a scary thing. I mean, even to me now as a grown person, like failing scares the crap out of me. And how do we make that an okay experience for these super young, radical, amazing young people who are also like put on a pedestal when they do this incredible work? So how do we give them those nets of safety and compassion? But when we talk about boundaries, I want to nominate you, Abby, because I know we experienced some boundaries engaging with young people specifically. So I was wondering if you could add.
Well, yeah. Well, one thing I was going to add first in that line of thought was just vulnerability with adults. I think I found that a beautiful thing about youth working in advocacy and things like that is they're very transparent and they'll speak about things. And when we talk about leadership and change, I'm in a class right now that's really focused on this. There's an idea of like there's a loss that comes with that, and I feel like that loss has to come at the adult level. And what is that loss? I think it's the culture of like hiding things and maybe not talking about mental health and maybe not talking about the experiences you had in your middle school and your high school, but that's really what is important for youth to hear to make those changes. But also with boundaries, you know, once we start talking about mental health and, you know, trauma-informed care and stuff, what is the balance there where adults need to heal for children? But healing is also really hard with all of, you know, thinking about healthcare and capitalism and all of that. So how can older people ensure that what they're going through isn't, you know, impacting kids in really negative ways while still uplifting them? It's going to be a really hard conversation going forward, I think.
I would just say that I think one of the barriers that we have is young people don't have, especially young people who are in marginalized communities, we don't always have the space to just exist. Yesterday, hearing someone on the panel say that like, oh, I just want to rest and watch TV sometimes. I think something that I have been thinking about a lot, especially with my current job position, the different roles that I have, is that sometimes I used to think that, okay, I'm an advocate because I dedicate myself to the cause. I'm an advocate because I dedicate myself to community, but I am also community. So when am I taking that rest and that space to exist as a person right now? And I think that also understanding that advocacy has various faces, that we don't all advocate in the same ways. We don't all have the space to advocate in the same ways. I mentioned before that my parents call me a playground activist, but in 2020, when the pandemic started and we were locked in the house and we were desensitized watching videos of Black murders on the screen, I didn't feel like an activist anymore. I wanted to sit in my bed and cry every day. And my mom told me, I don't want you going out there and protesting. And at first I was like, I'm 22, I can do what I want. But I took some time and some space and I thought about how here my parents are saying, these are the children that we're raising, and we are afraid because we don't want to lose our babies. So we have to start thinking about the fact that when we talk about advocacy, especially in marginalized communities, how does that advocacy look? It's not always going on stage to talk about advocacy, because sometimes that makes us targets. And I remember being in the kitchen at my grandma's house during the pandemic, and my parents were dancing and my baby sister was following them around. And I said that this is advocacy, this is protest. Being alive in a country that wants to see you dead is protest. So I think we need to take some time to really ask ourselves, when it comes to youth showing up in the advocacy space, how can we ensure that they're showing up for themselves and having some rest and existing just as people without having to wonder about if we have to code switch when we're presenting, if we have to use the right type of language, if we have to wear the right types of things. if my hair color is too distracting for people, if me using AAVE means that I'm not speaking proper English. So those are some of our barriers. And I think that as we engage in this work with young people, to not only see them as how they are, but believe them when they tell you who they are.
Yeah, this is very powerful, and it's making me think too of just the different roles that adults are playing in this youth organizing and advocacy. And we've mentioned parents, but that could be any caregivers, aunts, uncles, grandmas, guardians in general. But what have y'all seen the role of caregivers in the work that you do?
Well, I'm gonna cry. Hold on. Well, my parents are a really big inspiration to me. My mom is like, she works 2 jobs. Hold on, I gotta breathe real quick. She works 2 jobs. She's always there for me and my sisters. James, we can't thank you enough, honestly. Me and my other 2 sisters have been in this program for a while. I think my older sister's like 5 or 4 years. I just hit 3 years. My younger sister is barely, not even a year yet. But this has completely changed our whole perspective on life. It's brought me to a point where I know where I'm gonna go after college. I know what I wanna do. I know, like, I'm starting to look into things now. And, oh my God. It's given me a really big motivation. And I feel like with all these people supporting me and being there, and I know that I can go home to them at the end of the day and I can like just shoot a text to James real quick, like how I'm feeling, I'm gonna make it to where I wanna be. I'm gonna make it so then all youth can have access to the materials that they need for our future to be brighter than the sun. Yeah.
Not the tears, but I'll keep the question going. But it just reminds me yesterday when someone said, "What brings me joy in crying?" And like, these are happy tears.
Yeah.
Let's celebrate these tears.
To just piggyback off of what Liz was saying, we had this opportunity to come to the conference, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is cool. Like, this would be great, right?" And then there was an opportunity for parents to be able to come to the conference. So I reached out to the parents and say like, "Hey, what do you think about coming to the conference?" Like Liz's mom just got a promotion at work, and she was like, "I can't miss this. This is like an amazing opportunity." So being able to know that like our parents matter too, like if we're having a holistic approach, everything has to be kind of like calculated based off your intentions. We went to a Blackhawks game, a hockey game last year, and little sister Karina wouldn't get out of the van. And she wouldn't come to the game, and she wouldn't join the program. And I know that it was because of the trust that she has in me, because of the trust that her mother has in me, that her sister actually joined the program, right? And I was like, "Hey, well, Karina, I'm gonna give you like 6 months for you to, engage at the pace that you want to." And I'm seeing Karina when we just launched our first 2 weeks of program say, "Hey, let's welcome our intern and say thank you to our new intern." Or going to a shadow day at Whitney Young and talking about how she wants to go there for high school and how there was a MICFA teacher there and how it's just important that she gets a recommendation letter. And it's like, Karina, I'm my family. And I think that like with me being so grounded in community, the parents have to be a part of that family also. So yeah, like, being able to be intentional about creating spaces for our parents. The synergy we had last night when we went out, just about talking about how the conference was and what they thought about it. Like they actually came to the conference and they're learning and exploring just like we are. And now they can take back that information about adolescent brain development, right? Now they can have a different perspective on how they can support their young people. So being able to just be intentional about carving out spaces for parents and young people in that investment is how we truly move the needle. more tears.
Well, crying is life, right? So
Right.
life affirming. So I'm a big crier, so I'm pro tears. I think in addition to that, those wonderful thoughts, I think, and we've talked a little bit about this in multiple panels at this point, but centering joy and play. I mean, I think it's, snaps to that. I think it's really easy to get lost in the sauce. Advocacy work is really hard work. It's incremental and it can be devastating sometimes. And it can be racist and it can be horrible and awful and really hard to get into. And it can be really uncomfortable. So are we prioritizing joy and play? And are we helping parents do that and caregivers do that? Because again, it requires creativity and imagination to be in these kinds of spaces. So how are we helping foster that? Are we, making sure that there's a dance break on the agenda? Are we throwing the entire agenda out the window so that we can just be funny and goofy and enjoy existing with one another? And that, as Amaris put so beautifully, like that's radical advocacy, to just exist in these spaces with my peers, with my comrades, with my co-conspirators. Like there is so much magic that happens in there. And so how do you make sure that people know that you're simply existing is advocacy and your joy is radical?
I think I would just first say hearing these stories is just so beautiful. Like knowing that there are programs out there who are actively working with parents and like pouring into them as well. That is so beautiful. So I just want to say that. And also a couple of months ago, my mom hosted a tea for our family and for Mother's Day. And we did like some speeches. And I stood up and I told her, it wasn't until this year that I started paying my own bills that I realized that like you're actually a person. Like if you told me that my mom was like someone who had emotions and thoughts and feelings outside of being my mom, I'm like, no, she doesn't. Her only role in my life is to be my mom, like nothing else. And so now I think that like understanding that parents are still people and they have fears and worries about their children. I think that is really important. I think it's important for programs to pour into that so that they know that their children are safe. Because, a lot of times we will have this like opposition against our parents, like, oh, you don't understand me. And like, there are so many times that I felt like that until I realized that they want to protect me. And so ensuring that spaces are able to show that level of protection and care and nurturing is so important. And developing that trust, as you all were talking about, is just so important. And I think that's something that we should really ensure that we're doing because, these kids are the extensions of their parents. These are their babies. So I think that's also really important.
Yes, on a final note, I guess I will say I don't see a way of talking about youth advocacy without youth development. And I always go back to the point where it takes a village. It has to be teachers, it has to be organizers, and it has to be parents, it has to be aunts and uncles, everyone. I feel very involved in my own family's life. My sister had a parent-teacher conference for her daughter yesterday, and I was like, how'd it go? Blah, blah, blah. Like, just having that complete involvement is super important.
Oh yeah, I have to call my mom after this, tell her y'all done made me cry tears up here today. But I really think this even goes in Dr. Harris's point earlier about this intergenerational networking when it comes to learning. I took some notes. Intentional co-construction of solutions is so important. We can't do this work without thinking who else is supporting our young people. It's not just us in this program, it's their teachers, it's their parents, it's their aunties, it's everybody supporting young people. So how are we including them in these conversations? So I think this has been beautiful. And I just want to do one more question before we open it up to Q&A. Again, we're talking about solutions, and I know that navigating a lot of things can be difficult, especially when it comes to negotiations, and that can be negotiations for more funding, that can be negotiations with the media, that can be negotiations with outside partners. So I'm just curious, how have your programs navigated these difficult conversations with internally or externally? Because for new and upcoming programs, that might be something that they run into, and they're not completely sure how to handle those situations.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about this question at first, and now I'm really excited about it. I think it's really important to recognize when you're leading these programs or a part of these programs, recognizing your role as the broker for people's access to these young people. People are going to want to tokenize them. People are going to want to put them on a pedestal for whatever media story, and then just sort of drop off from there, right? And so it means advocating for them when that power balance is happening. It means negotiating those media deadlines so that young people have the time and the capacity to use their voice fully and effectively, and in a way that they feel that the control is in their space, like it is in their hands. It means that when one of my young advocates, a legislator was like beckoning them. They like summoned them for a meeting, and they called me Sunday night, and they were like, I don't know how to prepare for this meeting. I don't know what we're talking about. They didn't tell me. And I said, you have the power to turn around and say, what is this meeting for, so I can be most effectively prepared? You don't have to be summoned. But that's the nature of a lot of their relationships, right? Being summoned by teachers, being summoned by their parents. So letting them know that's not there's space for more than that. Like, you deserve to be fully effective and to know what you're going into, and you can ask for that. The train just like left the station, so I had some other things. But I think being a broker for that. Oh, I was gonna add like development, right? So I work at a nonprofit, and I work with a lot of folks get super excited about the young people, and I get so excited too. And they're like, hey, can we like post this? Can we post these quotes? Can we post this picture from these applications? And it's a moment for me to say, stop, hold, pause. And how do we fully inform these young people about what we would like to use, what pictures, so that it isn't transactional, so that we're not tokenizing them and we're not monetizing their beautiful voices and their beautiful thoughts. And so I think negotiating that and standing up for young people when they are being put on a pedestal or being tokenized by other folks is really important when you're part of these programs. And it's part of that trust.
Well, I want to say, like, yesterday in one of the panels, they were like, you were adding on about like being summoned by your teachers, by your parents. But they were saying that youth don't have to be invited to share their mind. Like, you don't have to have someone to be there for you to be able to get a hold of someone else. You should have that power that you can talk to anyone freely without having to like be scared of them. I also wanted to say, like, MCFA, we always have like an open space. It's like our little bubble, right? Where we talk about all these issues and we talk about how we can fix them while still having fun. We do this, like, all these fun energizers, hands-on. And we did a marshmallow tower exercise the other day, team building, right? And then the week before, we had a piece of paper. We drew, what is it?
Bubble letter.
Yeah, a bubble letter of our first name, first initial. And on the inside, we put what we wanted to be, and on the outside is what other people saw us. And it really like gave us a really big idea of our identity. It really made us think a lot. And like today, we even did an exercise. We did these cards. We grabbed cards out of a deck, and they're like little quotes. I really like mine. I feel like it goes really well. It says, "Worry about going out there and making your own legacy" by Floyd Mayweather Jr. And I was like, that really correlates with today. But we can go into this bubble without having to like get it burst by adults, and we don't have to be shut down. And I feel like that's why these programs are so important, because like I feel like I can get everything out, and I feel like no one's gonna judge me, and in the end, I'm gonna get to share all my thoughts and opinions. Yeah, that's like.
Perfect. Well, before we open it up, I just want to thank you all for sharing and being open and honest with us today. I think I can speak for myself, but learned so much from you, and I'm inspired to kind of think about my own next steps and how I move. So can we go ahead and give our panelists a round of applause, please? All right, and we will open up for the last Q&A session of the conference.
Hi, thank you all so much for all your words this morning. I wanted to hear from you all what you all think the role of boundaries is in today's youth voice conversation. I heard a lot of people talking about texting their young people and things like that, and I know that those things have been kind of taboo for a long time. So I want to know what you all have seen in your work. How has the dynamic of boundaries between young people and adults changed over your time?
We ground everything within our program at MICFA, specifically with our young people, around consent. So I got to ask Liz, can I share a story? I asked Liz how was the video. I asked Jontel how was the video, and continuing to have those conversations and to know that like this work is not for the faint. I had somebody call me last week telling me that they hired 3 people to join our program, and it was a young person. His name's David, and it was at 9:30. But he was excited, right? Like, it's cool, David. Like, I appreciate it because we're trying to get to our goals and reach our numbers, right? But like, he's a part of that process. So I can't put him in a box to say, hey, like, you can't reach me at this moment, right? Like, I'm a mentor. There's, to me, like, no time, right? Like, no time frame. It's about knowing that young people need to rest. I need to rest, to just be, to recharge and regroup, but grounding everything in consent, asking them questions first. So whatever I do, like if we got to do an action in the community, they thought of that, like consent. Like, do you feel comfortable with us sharing your quote? Do you feel comfortable with us? Do you like the interview questions? Like, do you want to come up with the interview questions? So I think this is being able to have consent from the young people, having clear boundaries to also know, and Liz taught me this. Last year, we were in our like 3rd year of the pandemic, and I was like trying to like hold on to them. Like, hold on to them. But I felt myself not being able to hold on to myself. So we paused the program for the first time ever. And we said, what do we need to be able to do to really figure out how do we support them? So it actually was just like we stopped having session and we came in and we had office hours. And the same thing that we did in session, we did in office hours, and office hours in that time frame worked for them. Usually we have program, and we were running a program for like 4 to 6:30. We shifted our office hours so that like we didn't get the lingering calls at 9:30. So we're going to put office hours for 5 to 7. So just being able to continue to unpack and meet young people where they're at, but also being able to scale back, and it's okay to say no. I think that there is no negotiation. There's a no, right? Because it's back to what you said. Like, you have to have space to just be. So we were able to then be intentional about having that space for our young people to take care of their schooling. Because she's telling me, James, I got a quiz. James, I got a test. Well, she can't be in session. So I need to be able to figure out, what does it look like for me to be able to continue to have her here? Also, while they move back in person. So that was like a different layer, right? Like figuring out like, well, how do I kind of create it? So I think that you just got to have grace also with like also being able to prioritize consent, to know that it's kind of like not black and white when you're directly servicing young people.
I'll also add that it's really important to be transparent. I think as adults, like a lot of people think maybe like youth can't handle certain things, and there definitely are boundaries within that as well. But just saying like, if you see a text at 9 p.m. and you're about to go to bed, say, I'm going to bed, but I'll answer it in the morning, right? And so that way, they're not sitting there thinking, oh, he's ignoring me, and moving forward like that. And also like being able to say like, hey, I'm overwhelmed by this program right now, or I think I'm at capacity. I think that's something I've really started to work into my work this year. And I learned it from voices saying like, what is my capacity to do this work? I'm very involved, but should I hand it off to someone else? And that connects to vulnerability too.
No, thank you for saying that, because I think it's passion knows no bounds. That's what's so hard about it, right? We get so passionate and are in love with these young people, and we want to be there for them every step of the way. But when we practice our own boundaries, then we let the person behind us know that they can practice those boundaries. That my urgency doesn't have to be your urgency, and vice versa. So I think that boundaries and practicing them is not just an act of self-care, it's an act of community care. And it's okay to name those and say, I'll come back to it. Or, a lot of people have iPhones. You can use the DND. Everyone can see that you're not accepting texts right now. I use it a little too liberally, but then people know. I mean, almost every young person every young person that's in my phone has an iPhone, so they can see that I'm not looking at my texts after 10 o'clock, right? So I think that demonstrating those boundaries is a great example and is part of that development.
Hi, everyone. I'm over here, Channing, here at UVA. I had a question about just thinking about the role of research, because you all are bringing us such a gift by giving us these concrete strategies of how you work with young people. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is like, what do you all see as the role of research, and how do you want researchers to approach you, if at all, right? Because we know that in the working with community, there's a real tension with researchers, right? We come in, we drop in, do this interesting study, and then we leave, which I think that a lot of researchers in the room, especially the ones I know, that's not how we want to function. But there's also some tension in terms of the institutions we work for and the demands that they have on us, even though we want to authentically work with community. So I'm wondering from you all, what is the role that you see us working with you all, and how do we do that in authentic ways that actually really support you in continuing to do this work?
Well, not that long ago, we did a Valentine's Day luncheon for the seniors with Alderman Stephanie Coleman of the 16th Ward in Chicago. And she was like talking to us. They didn't want us to leave. The seniors did not want us to leave. And then later we did a community cleanup, youth-led, no funding at all. And this year we got aldermen from Stephanie Coleman to, we got funding from her. And we got to have the opportunity to hand out 300 book bags in like all the councils, all the neighborhoods. And we had tacos there, we had cotton candy. We made sure it was a great time. It was a great time for everyone, including us, and we were supposed to be quote unquote working. That's why I'm saying it's more fun than it feels like a job. But yeah, it was like an amazing opportunity. It made us all feel really empowered. We gave soapbox speeches. Mine was on gentrification. Jontel was like on violence in our communities. And I think that was something that really helps us keep doing what we're doing. Like knowing that they're there and then they come back again and again and again. It keeps us moving, knowing that they are always there, that we can reach out to them, that we can like just go to them for everything. And like that they can come for us. If they need our input, we're there for them. Yeah.
Just the level of accessibility. I think that when we talk about researchers knowing that like it can't be transactional, because realistically, you can be what a young person is striving for, right? So now I get to see someone who looks like me that's doing something completely different than what I can imagine, right? So Jontel mom was having a conversation. You're not into sports. You're not into basketball and all the other stuff. So like, and that's fine. That's okay for the young people who are doing that. But he saw something different within the program. So I feel like when you all come in, it's like just being human, a human-to-human interaction, and then being intentional about what does it look like for you to step outside of your comfort zone and show a level of vulnerability to say, hey, I want to mentor that young woman. Hey, I want to come back and just have a conversation, to put on a workshop. It has to be a continuous effort to truly not make it feel transactional. It has to be transformational. And then I think also having a level of transparency on what you're actually looking for. And then also like defining what does authenticity look like for researchers, because there's a level of vulnerability that young people are going to organically show. So researchers can't come in. It's just like, we want the numbers, we want this information, we want your story, but that's it. Like that's not going to work. That's why I feel like in certain situations when young people, like when people are coming into our space, I need to know what's your agenda. How are you going to continue to work with our young people. In the video earlier, we had someone train us in restorative justice. She's done that for the last 2 years. So now there's a rapport when she comes into our space. Now it's not about if she's teaching them about the beloved community and norms, but it's about, hey, Ms. Ashley is here supporting us. She came to their event to set up a resource table and also help engage, not to kind of come and train them again. So I was just encouraged, like, you're powerful. You have divine gifts. Allow them to see those divine gifts and tap into theirs.
Good morning. I wanted to ask, especially for the younger folks on the panel, when we talk about self-limiting or political limiting on youth and that climate, can you tell us how that relates to your desire or ability to want to participate in our voting and systems that are in place now?
Yeah, I feel when I'm limited, I don't feel like I have power at all. Like, self-limiting, not for me. You can ask my mom. I literally go home, I'm like, I did this, this, and this today, and my friends did this, this, and this, and I just like get it all out. But when it comes to like political limiting, I don't feel like I can do much because there's not much access for us. Us youth, like I said, we need more materials. We need more access. We need more people to work with, more stakeholders. So I feel like we can't really say our voice in political issues because no one's asking for it. And we always feel like we have to be invited to share our voice, and it's just like it gets a little to me. I do have my thoughts and opinions about it. But we can share it in MICVA, there's a space for that, but there's not enough space after that. Like, yeah, we get it out, but where's our access to it? Like, youth today, we should go into like the voting offices. We should like help people just so we can get a gist of it, just so we can learn more how we can help them with still not being able to vote. And I feel like youth, not only can adults help youth, youth can help adults. Adults are still learning. Adults learn with youth, they learn about youth. Youth is the same way around. Everyone should really, like I think yesterday it was like, it's not about unity, it's more about coexistence. Unity is important, but coexistence is even greater.
More question?
Hello, thank you so much to all the panelists. Edward Scott is my name. I have a question that's kind of sketched out around community support and messaging, because so much of you are talking about community impact. And I'm thinking specifically about a comment made by James where you said the youth aren't broken, right? And yet I'm holding that in tension with the fact that a lot of times in order to get that monetary support, in order to get community engagement, you have to propagate a narrative of crisis, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you all go about pushing back against the call for crisis messaging? What is the messaging that you communicate to community partners and to funders to get their support without unintentionally reifying this idea that there is something wrong with the children or wrong with the youth and that the youth are the problem?
I can start us off with that one. I also, and I get this from Dr. Jen Wright as well, from Healing Centered Engagement. We talk so often about what we're against. So how do we flip it and talk about what we're for? And how do we encourage others to recognize that instead of sitting in deficits? How do we honor and get excited about assets? Because there's a beautiful story there about potential and the future. So that's just my first thought.
Transparency, courageous leadership, radically reimagining how you tell the story that hasn't been told. We had an opportunity to go to the library here on campus, and I saw their self-portraits. There's a story for me personally as a Black man that doesn't show my people in chains. It shows my people with their beauty and their power and our culture and our pride and our love for each other and our love to unite in community. And I'm going to go into every single donors meeting and stress the importance of that. Not only do I have to do that, I need to make sure that young people have a space, right? And it's not about tokenism. It's about knowing that they deserve to be able to have love, like peace, and thriving communities. And it's time for like us to be able to embark on that journey. So it's courageous leadership. Like, it's literally about grounding yourself and knowing who you are. You know, for me, I try to live out my purpose to the best of my ability. I try to set my intentions, like we set intentions, affirming each other, and letting donors and everybody else know in the community that this work is important. And it's important, and you show us that by how you show up, right? So don't show up and come take a picture. Show up and put your gloves on. Show up and engage in this check-in. Show up and actually listen to Liz and say, like, well, what are the tangible resources that we can give you, right? And you can build off of. I think it's about courageous leadership and knowing that what we've been doing has not worked. It's okay to name that. And it's about being able to chart a course to actually figure out what does work, right? So whether it's what they're doing here, and we talked about the portrait yesterday and figuring out how that evolves, right? Like, that's the work that we need to continue to like amplify, courageous leadership.
Yeah, that's so important. I would just add that, like, especially as a writer, I've had to be very cognizant of how I talk about myself and like how I show up in different spaces. And I know that like a couple of minutes ago, I told you all how it's really important to not just to look at youth for who they tell you that they are. And so I think with programs, it's very important to have those conversations with youth of what their story is and not what you want their story to be. And so when working with those funders, when having these conversations, to really ensure that the best practices are being set place before you get into that room. So just having a good understanding of the story that the youth want to tell, who they are, and just remembering that we are not our marginalizations. I can tell you all of the identities that intersect in my life, but I exist outside of those. And so I think that's just really important to ensure that you're asking the youth who they are before you form the story to tell.
I think that's a perfect end to our time here. I want to thank you again just for these like emotional stories as well as inspiring. I know that I'm ready to do some good work, and I hope that we can not only continue these conversations right now in the closing of the conference, but also start to network and make connections moving forward. So again, I want to thank you all for sharing part of yourself with us.